Hello, everybody, and welcome to In Conversation. My name is James Campbell, and on today's podcast, I'm joined by Professor Jo Turney, editor of Clothing Cultures, an Intellect publication. Jo, welcome to the podcast. It's so wonderful to see you, and it's great to have you on. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. So how are things with you?
Well, thank you so much, James, for inviting me. Everything is just lovely. Obviously, it's a bit dark here now, but it's great. It's really good.
So we say here now, but where are you calling in from?
Oh, well, I'm at the University of Southampton. Well, I'm actually based in Winchester School of Art, which is part of the University of Southampton. So in the south of England, somewhere between the south coast and London. And it's a really fantastic place. It's an art school that's 150 years old, and it's one of the oldest in the country. So I'm very privileged to work here. So yeah, I'm here. I am Professor of Fashion and Textiles, and I also run the PhD programs in the Faculty of Arts and Humanities. So I have a leadership role and also a teaching and research role, which is very exciting and positions me ideally to deal with and address and to learn from undergraduates all the way through to postgraduate researchers, which is a fantastic role, really.
Oh, thank you very much, Jo. I appreciate you giving us that sort of intro. So again, I say thank you very much for your time, because it sounds like you're probably pulling a late shift for us here, stuck in the office. So thank you very much for joining us for the podcast. Can you just tell us a little bit about some of your research interests? Because I find them fascinating. Just what are the key things that you're well known for, and what you're maybe currently researching?
Well, I suppose I'm best known for The Culture of Knitting, which is a book that came from my PhD project. But actually, all of my research does essentially the same thing in lots of different ways. I'm really interested in the way in which the everyday becomes extraordinary, how we transform life through just general acts of being, behaving, interacting, those kinds of things. I'm also very interested in marginality, marginal voices, marginal positions, and always have been. I'm a working class person, and I have felt all the time that there are lots of things that perhaps art historians, design historians, the background that I have, really don't get about what it's like to be ordinary and or just not particularly privileged. And I've always really wanted to highlight those marginal voices, essentially. And also I went to university when the new art history was raging, and the Birmingham Cultural Centre for Cultural Studies was like the kind of topic of the day. So we're all very interested in hearing voices that we don't normally hear. So that's where I really started, and all my work does that. So from the Culture of Knitting, I wrote Fashion and Crime. And then I went on to write In Private, which is about 1970s domestic interior design at the moment. So I've written, a fair bit, and all of my research looks at ways in which things that we have stigmatized are really unfairly stigmatized, and giving those kinds of positions new voices. So things that we think are ugly, things that we think are dangerous, things that we think are kitsch or nasty or low culture, actually have real genuine value and represent the lives of those who use them and beyond.
Well, thank you again, Jo. That's really fascinating to hear your take on how you perceive your own research. And of course, you're the founding editor of Intellect's Clothing Cultures. So, and that's one that you and I have worked on for some time now. And of course, you and I have bumped into each other at conferences over the years. And it's always been such a pleasure to work with you on that publication. I was just wondering if you could just, for our audience, just tell us, like, in a nutshell, what's the journal all about? What's the aims and scope?
It kind of is what it says on the tin in lots of ways. It is really about a celebration of clothing, but it's also about talking about clothing not necessarily away from a fashion lens, but as an alternative to it. Everywhere you live, whoever you are, however old you are, whatever your background, we all wear clothes. We all have an experience of what it is to be a dressed person as well as an undressed person. And those things have genuine meaning in many, many different ways. So really, this is about talking about how and why we are so interested in clothes, how we feel in our clothes, but also how clothes are more than just a communicator. They're a way of making money, they're a way of surviving, they're a way of protecting, they're a way of forging relationships. You name it, clothes do it. Okay. And I think really one of the things that really drove me to really set up this journal, or to really think about this deeply, was the way in which fashion privileges, and it privileges in lots of ways. It's very Eurocentric to start with, and also it it doesn't talk about people's everyday experience of dress. In some ways, the way in which fashion is all pervasive is quite harmful. You know, it makes people feel ugly or fat or outside that culture, and sometimes it highlights people's differences in a negative way. It's not that I'm anti-fashion, I'm absolutely not. I love fashion, I teach fashion, have done for years. But I think that there are some ways in which we really need to hear other voices. And certainly when I talked to you initially about setting up clothing culture, it was in response to a paper I'd heard at a conference I was running in Bath about transnational dress. And it was a paper by Wesley Ling, who is now a professor at London Metropolitan University, and she's on our editorial board as well. And she was talking about how fashion is inherently racist. And this was in 2011, and we know that now. I mean, we've always known it really, but now we talk about it. Okay. Yeah. And I felt at that moment, and she'd shown this wonderful picture of Keira Knightley in Vogue, you know, with the Masai Mara. And it was just something that was straight out of a Merchant Ivory film. You know, it was something that was deeply uncomfortable about it. And even when I look at it now, it makes me cringe to my core. And at the time, people weren't really talking about it. And I suddenly thought, and I have no idea why other people hadn't thought of this, because it's not like I'm a genius. It just came to me at that moment. You know, this is what we need to do. We need to flatten the field. We need to talk about how we have a commonality between all of us through dress, and all of those dress practices are different. We all get dressed in the morning, but how we do that, why we do that, and in what we do is completely different. And we need to hear about those things much, much more.
Would you say that that was that article then, or that paper, was that the moment that inspired you to found the journal? Then, if you had to pick a moment, that was the turning point for you, that you were like, I've got to do this, I've got to commit. Yeah,
absolutely. But also, I mean, that was absolutely the turning point. But for a long time up to that point, even though I was teaching fashion, I work with oral history, I work with ethnology, I work with a whole variety of different methods, and with people in different areas as well. So I think that sense that we could have a conference at that time that talked about national dress, at a time we weren't talking about national dress. People could talk about dress in other countries, how dress practices enhanced life, showed particular kinds of leadership roles or whatever. It just changed my opinion of how we value things, I think, and how necessary those conversations were to continue. And I think I've been proved right, to be honest.
Well, that was my next question. So, you know, I wanted to go back to the inaugural editorial, and you basically you described the project as carving out clothing culture as its own field. And I just wanted to ask you, how do you feel that's gone? And like, do you define that field now? And has it shifted in the last decade, or have things moved around for you, or do you feel like the definitions and the way that you found it's kind of followed through as you'd expect?
I actually think it's become much more exciting, definitely. And I think that this has been in response to a variety of different political agendas in a very positive way. So now we hear different voices all the time. We have a wider reach globally to a variety of different people and groups of people, and people whose voices wouldn't necessarily have been heard in an academic publication in English. And I feel that this is really valuable because it's highlighted everyday clothing, but also it's highlighted lots of different narratives about clothing in lots of different disciplines. So, for example, we now hear a whole variety of Black voices talking about Black dress, Black communities, just in the US, of course, and also in Europe, but predominantly in the Caribbean, in Africa, globally. You know, many of our journal issues include people from places that we wouldn't have 10 years ago, certainly not 20 years ago, have heard a voice from. We also have many contributors from India, from China, from other places where perhaps we know very little about how people dress, but also how similar we all are. You know, and those things are important too. So I think that we've really progressed. To answer your question, sorry, we have really progressed. But what we have done is we've expanded the field more than I had imagined in such a short amount of time. Really, you know, is a global issue.
I would agree with you totally. And just to sort of provide some sort of anecdotal evidence almost is we founded the journal alongside a few other fashion publications, some time ago now. And then since then, we had proposals that focused on more regional areas, but also international fashion studies, taking a very international view, and also accepting papers, in non-English, which is a big demarcation, and also shows there's enough demand to facilitate and to be able to afford to do that. But then also our book program too, and this is just from us, but I know many other companies out there also would agree. We have Fashion Cities Africa working with fashion practitioners, clothing makers, and other people within the context of Africa, focusing on specific cities, and that was very successful. And we've done things on like heavy metal style and like real like subcultural stuff within the context of Africa. And then of course in India as well, many great contributions to your journal and others. But also thinking about sort of similarities, they already have like the National Institute of Fashion Technology and the National Institute of Design and the Pearl Academy. India's full of scholarly specific institutions which focus on fashion, clothing, design, and things that are very relevant to the journal and to the fashion studies community more broadly. And I think it took publications like Clothing Cultures to kind of kick down that door a little bit, and to sort of show that we really wanted that to be a two-way street. And I'm glad to hear that that's how you feel that
I do think it's gone very well. I think that it has expanded, and certainly you would not want a journal to stay the same over 10 years, would you? You'd want it to keep developing and growing, and I think that we are.
Well, I'm going to say as well is I definitely from an international point of view, but I also wanted to ask you, Clothing Cultures invites contributions from a lot of different disciplines and a lot of different kinds of scholars and practitioners. To my mind, obviously textile historians is a big sort of market or demographic. Designers, practice-led scholars, you're quite innovative in the terms of research and the kinds of format that you'll publish it in. So how has that interdisciplinarity shaped the journal as well? Do you think of it as being interdisciplinary and like, how has that changed?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is completely interdisciplinary. I mean, of course, we accept things that are fashion based, of course. And of course, we take dress history, and of course, we take, a variety of other things. But actually, the work of, practitioners is very important, because clothing is about manufacture, about ideas, about creative process, also about communicating through that. We've certainly had several basic, I suppose, just image-based essays. We've had those kind of things. I mean, Intellect is very useful and good in this way, where they allow us to publish so many images, which is so important. If you can't see things, it's very difficult to really get to grips with that. I do know we describe images now for people who have sight loss and such like, but it's very difficult to communicate dress without being able to see it or almost feel it or feel the movement. So having practitioners engage with this is very useful. And also, we're happy to talk about things like work in progress. We take lots of different but interesting additions. I think that one of the key joys of clothing culture is that we like to hear new ways of doing things. We like to add to the discussion. We like to have new methods, new approaches from new places, different people, because it just keeps these ideas fresh, and it allows us to build better knowledge of dress and clothing practices, as well as design. But, the whole journal anyway is from idea to manufacture, to sale, to wearing, to not wearing, to disposing, all of those kinds of things. So it inhabits so many spaces. And when you think about the success of very ordinary clothing exhibitions in museums, for example, there's so much potential to talk about gallery display, to talk about those kinds of selections. And we had a wonderful paper quite recently about a suit and whether it's possible to actually understand clothing from just looking at it. And I think these are kind of really interesting takes on things, that you can see it from so many different examples. And also in my own university, people have said to me, oh, I'm an archaeologist, but I really, really like weaving, or I really like a particular kind of clothing, or I'm really engaged in this, from all different disciplines. And also I work with a whole variety of people in the university as well, you know, who work in STEM, because they're interested in different kinds of clothing practices too. So I think that there is so much potential that we haven't even tapped yet, you know, that's possible.
So just to bring it on to maybe a call for papers type question, it sounds like obviously the journal has general calls and they're always open. So you're always open, and people can go to www.intellectbooks.com. They can search for clothing cultures. Yes. They can read a free issue. They can see all the abstracts for the previously published papers. There's the notes for contributors, and of course, to vet, they can not only see yourself and your editorial team, but they can also see the list of editorial board members and all the contributors, so you can see, oh yes, I know those people, I reference them. And it's also worth mentioning, of course, that the journal is indexed and it is highly ranked. It is in the usual suspects, Scopus, ESBI, and things like that. We know it's important to jump through those hoops too. But so if people are interested, they can just go online, they can submit through the portal, or they can email you or one of your colleagues, and they can share, their I suppose like a brief overview, and there's all the information there.
Absolutely. And we're always happy to talk through ideas. You know, if somebody has an idea and they don't really know what form it might take or what it might look like, we're very happy to do that. You know, myself and my associate editor work with practitioners all the time and have done for many, many years. Matilda Aspinall, who's my associate editor, is a practitioner. So, you know, we've got lots and lots of experience if people come from a different perspective to kind of find a way in which that would suit both the author and obviously the format of the journal. You know, we obviously want to keep our readership, so we don't want anything kind of so frightening that would put people off. But of course, we really want to encourage novelty and innovation and new ways of thinking and doing. And of course, that is all very much part of what it is to publish. Publishing is not just about writing, right?
No, I totally agree. And as well as these general kind of call for papers that are always up there, are there any current themes or any CFPs that are out there, or that you're going to be launching over the next couple of months that might have more of a specialist theme or anything like that, or is that not on the cards at the moment?
Well, it's not on the cards at the moment, but I think there are certain areas that I think might be very interesting for people to think about, are very contemporary. I mean, I know that there's been a lot about mending, but that still remains very important. And I think that is important because of the world in which we live, you know, at the moment. And I think that the fact that we have a very difficult situation in the world, wherever you live in the world, it's not great for you. It's always worth thinking about that situation and about how things might be addressed, or how clothing might be addressed, for example, or how you can talk about practices of care or practices of communication or social outreach or things like that. I think that's very important. But I also think that there's a lot of stuff at the moment about aging. I don't want to hijack that because I know a lot of intellect journalists are doing stuff on aging.
No, but it's important. It's been historically, it hasn't. Yeah, and just to railroad you for a second, but yeah, we just had a book by a working artist, you know, Sharon Loudon, and it's called Last Artist Standing, you know. And the book is all about artists and aging, but artists over the age of 50, looking at legacy, looking at, oh, you didn't buy a house when they were cheap. Okay, well, here's some other tactics to help you sustain an artistic practice now that you're getting older. So these topics are coming from all different creative industries. And I think the more the merrier, to be honest with you. It's really interesting.
I think that's great. I mean, I also think things like embodiment and experience, the experience of wearing. I think this is useful just in general because, of course, we need to work more closely with industry as well. We have a lot to offer as writers, practitioners, and such like. And I think that if industry could save some money by learning how to make clothes that fit people, that would be a great start. So thinking about comfort, thinking about how one inhabits clothes, also thinking about that general posture, those kinds of things, those embodied experiences are really important. Also things like hybrid identity. So we talk a lot about fashion and identity, but now, is there such a thing as an identity? You know, the idea of hybridity is very, very popular at the moment, particularly in, you know, with young designers, of course, but also just in how we live anyway. I think that, you know, I'm sure that everybody who's listening to this does not go out and buy a new set of clothes every week and wear them for the week and chuck them away. So all of these things that we see as part of ourselves are continually being added to. So I'm personally a great fan of wardrobe studies, so more of those would be great. And also, a few things like, of course, sustainability and things like that are important. But, you know, there are lots of journals that deal with that specifically. So I would particularly like to see things about sustainability in terms of sustainability of employment, particularly in manufacture, but also things like sustainability of practice. A huge amount of interest in intangible cultural heritage, of course, across the globe. And of course, all of those things tend to have some kind of decorative or performative or behavioral kind of focus. So all of these things just possible. And obviously we're open to suggestion, you know, we're very up for anything new or novel. And if people are having a conference or they want to, you know, invite us or, you know, find a place for some of the papers that they do, I'm obviously very happy to talk about that too.
Okay, that's really Jo, you've actually answered a couple of my questions there. So no, it's brilliant. No, it's brilliant. I think you've given people a really clear overview of what the journal's about, but also the kinds of themes and topics that you're seeing come in, and maybe a few things that you would like to see a bit more of. I'm hoping what people are getting from this is that, like, it's just go on the website, take a look at the aims and scopes, take a look at the previously published work, but then reach out, you know, and to use the platform to share ideas, and then, you know, to engage, and hopefully, you know, there'll be a lot of opportunities to have your work published. I mean, also, I imagine you're probably also keen on, if people haven't published before, maybe things like reviews, right? And I imagine
absolutely. And also, we do offer mentoring. I'm very happy to mentor people on the editorial board, very happy to mentor. So if you are new to publishing, and publishing is quite daunting and it is quite different, and it's certainly different if you're, you know, you're just out of an MA or a PhD, it's different to those kinds of practices. We're very happy to mentor you. We don't want to turn people away. You know, we want people to have the experience of publishing in a very nice human environment with good support. And I think that that is absolutely what we do all the time. So if people are new, you can write reviews, of course, and also I would really like some exhibition reviews. There's so many fabulous exhibitions happening at the moment globally. I would really like to see more of those. So do that. And also I get lots of books sent to me, so if people want to edit to talk about these or write reviews, I'm very happy to send them to people, you know. So look me up, find me, contact me, and I'm very happy to post them on to you.
So, you know, just to everyone out there, if you're, you know, if you're doing an MA and you're thinking, oh my gosh, how do I start, how do I navigate this world, well, it sounds like Jo is a good first port of call. And, you know, if you're interested in submitting a review, one great idea is to come with perhaps an idea of your own about an exhibition that's taking place in your local community, or maybe if you're, you know, you're part of an Indigenous community or something like that, where an exhibition is focusing on the clothing or the culture in your area or in your history, then that would be really interesting to have those perspectives, especially, like you say, from people, groups and individuals who might have been, you know, negated or haven't had the same platform. But it's also important that people come to you with those ideas so that we can showcase them. But yeah, that's great. And also just ECRs in general, right? So early career researchers, you know, clothing cultures, it sounds like a great place to submit if you've got a great idea. And obviously it has very robust peer review. And it, you know, it is a very quality journal. It is high on the indexing and through the rankings. So, you know, there's obviously a lot of hoops that one will need to jump through, but it's great for ECRs, early career researchers, postgrads, to know that the team and the board are very, very top tier quality individuals, but at the same time they're willing to negotiate, to mentor and to work with on developing those projects, because peer review can be quite you know, a tricky thing. And it can also be, you know, it can really, you know, flatten people's egos, and you definitely have to kind of have that thick skin if you're going to publish in journals. But it's also nice to know that there's journals out there like yours that are very collegial and will take a very constructive approach.
I think that lots of people are very nervous about publishing in general because of peer review. And I do realise there are lots of memes about, you know, reviewer two and all of those kinds of things and how evil people are. And of course, we've all been through that. Unfortunately, that is the game here. But we do really try to offer constructive feedback wherever we can. I mean, we would never say anything rude to anybody. We would never be reviewer two. But what we do is we give as much positive feedback, but also helpful feedback as possible. So if we say, could you amend this because, we will say the because and give reasons why that needs changing. I mean, sometimes people give us a lot of information that readers will already know about. You know, we don't need to know the entire fashion system because everybody will be acquainted with that.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, there will be moments where perhaps that's not the case, but you can use references or footnotes or whatever, and people can look these things up. So it's really about, you know, I think this is more about publishing rather than peer review, James. Is that okay?
Yeah, well, I guess there's a couple of things I was going to talk about and clear up, and then I've got a couple of questions for you as well around peer review. I think at the moment there's a few things going on. So I think journals, but especially publishers, when it comes to peer reviewing scholarly books, we're struggling for peer reviewers. So one thing I'd just like to say is if anyone's interested in being a peer reviewer, or especially for clothing cultures, then do reach out to Jo with PB, and you could potentially become a peer reviewer, which is one really important. We really need the help, and like also it's obviously a great way to be involved in a publication to further the field. And you know, I don't need to tell people the good, the bad, and the ugly around peer review. But of course, because there's a lack of peer reviewers, there's a lot of concern around whether new technologies such as AI would be utilized in peer reviewing. And of course, there are instances and cases of that happening. And that's not the case with Intellect. But I would just say to everybody to keep an eye on what's going on out there in the world in terms of how AI might be utilized for peer review, and stay abreast of those issues and those conversations. And I'd say go to Intellect and look at our AI section, and it will give you exactly a very clear overview of how and when and why and what we would consider using AI or large language models for, and it has very clear guidelines, you know, and that you have to opt in and various other things. So we're not using AI for peer review. We have no plans to, and we're constantly vetting and working with our partners to see what their approaches are. But do be aware of that. So peer review, there's a few questions around that. But I just wanted to say as well, because you've spoken about obviously opening this up to groups that have been historically disenfranchised and things of that nature, peer review and journal publishing in general can be conservative, especially in some fields. And fashion and clothing and textiles and these different areas, you know, in some ways have come out of quite conservative fields, you know, from sort of like those big universities, those big state unis over here in the US, where they can be in quite conservative states, for example, as well. And then, you know, also at the same time, the kind of approach that we've taken with clothing cultures is innovative and it's breaking and shaking, right? So I just wanted to ask about peer review, and if people have concerns about it, how do you kind of ensure clothing cultures supports experimental methodologies, but also diverse voices? Because I know that's really important to you and to the publication.
Yeah, totally.
And how would you sort of reassure people who maybe would see peer review as a gatekeeping, not in a good way in terms of quality control, but in terms of keeping people out potentially?
Well, that just never happens, honestly. And I read every submission, okay, just because I think it's important to know what's going on. It's important to know what kind of things we're getting in. It's important to keep abreast of everything that's happening. And of course, I'm a control freak, so all of those things are really important. But also, we have people on the board who actually believe that too.
Yeah.
We know it's an innovative journal. We know that there might be some things that we don't perhaps get. So therefore, we go back to authors and say, could you just explain a little bit more about this? You know, if we have a submission that is not about clothing or culture, then obviously it's not really for us, you know, but we might be able to find somebody who might want to take that paper, of course. But if it is about clothing, but it's about something that we don't understand or need perhaps more information on, we will talk to the author about that. I mean, there's no point in turning away something that you don't understand, because the whole point is that you learn something. So it's really important to make sure that everybody is as inclusive as possible. Of course, we have particular rules about what we can publish and what we can't publish. You know, we don't want to publish anything that's inflammatory or or hurtful or whatever. But ultimately, everybody wants the best for the discipline, and therefore new voices, new approaches, new things are vital for that.
And it's worth just highlighting as well, to go back to my point about people maybe reaching out to you if they want to be a peer reviewer, or if they want to have a formal position on the board.
Yeah.
Obviously that goes through a vetting procedure.
Yes.
Includes many, obviously different components and things. But like, if people feel that they're underrepresented, then do reach out, and then I know the board is a good place to start for people to have a look and see who's involved, what countries are involved, what different kinds of people are involved. And then if you see a gap and you don't feel that you or your culture or your type of scholarship or your method is being given the credence it deserves, then reach out to Jo, and then there can be a conversation to be had about that, whether it's around submitting an article, doing a review of something maybe local, or that's powerful to your community. But then beyond that, maybe joining the team, the board, and then ensuring that people are in positions of power who can affect change, as well as the vetting, right? I guess it's also important to mention with the peer review, it's great that you keep your eye on everything, but of course there's also an anonymous peer review process as well that goes on.
Of course, yes, I'm sorry about that. Yes,
decisions. Although it's great to know that you are keeping an eye on obviously things and the procedures, but like all quality journals, it's got a anonymous, robust peer review process, and there's info on that online as well. Right. Well, look, I think we've covered a lot of ground here, but I do have a few more questions for you. I wanted to ask about sort of looking beyond academia, because the journal is very scholarly in many respects, but of course it has broader influence. And these days we talk a lot about impact beyond the academy, and intellects sign up to DORA and various other groups and organizations. So we're looking to not only have high citations, but we want it to be cited by the right people who can affect that kind of change. People who maybe could affect policy and things of that nature. So I wanted to look beyond the academia, and with clothing cultures, have you noticed, does it influence museum practice? Do you hope it will influence curating or public history about clothing and textiles? What are your kind of goals there, and is that something that you struggle to achieve? Or
I think it's very hard to understand or think about how things might impact directly. I do think that we do have a lot to offer all of those spaces, of course. I think that particularly things to do with dress, for example, all kinds of dress, is important to museum culture without question, because museums make all of their money from having big exhibitions of dress and fashion and clothing and all of those things, because everybody understands it. So I think that that's important. I also think that we have a lot of articles that come through us about outreach programs, about education, about ethnographic work that deals with particular people's understanding of things that talk about community practice, particularly with mending and things like that. So there's a lot of stuff that has value, that does speak beyond the academy, because it comes from beyond the academy, and I think that's important. There's also lots of stuff that we've had recently from Indonesia, for example, that talks about street trading and street markets and things like that, and other forms of consumption and consumerist practice. And I think that's important as well, because this is where brands could learn, for example, from how other people are using those things. So do I know whether people take things specifically from clothing cultures on board? No, I don't. But that's probably because people would not tell me that had happened, because they're keeping it quiet. But I do think that what we do is we have a very big opportunity to make a huge, outreach from what we do. I think that there are opportunities for us as a journal, but as a board, as a group of individuals, to talk more widely about things to those other areas, to talk to museum practice about things, to talk about other things. But clothing cultures is obviously, I think it's very innovative, but it comes from a very kind of traditional basis. It has a basis in ethnography, in oral history, and those are things that museums use themselves It's just that we use it for clothing. So not always, but it has that kind of basis. So it does do those things already, but I think that we certainly could have, you know, impact in so many ways. And certainly wardrobe studies has definitely had impact on industry, particularly in places like Scandinavia, where brands are working with people on resizing, on resale, on, you know, remarketing things based on, you know, people's feedback. So it's absolutely possible. Absolutely.
Okay. I've got one more question about the journal specifically, and then I'm going to ask you a few fun questions.
Okay.
But I wanted to ask, like, looking ahead, what are your main hopes for Clothing Cultures over the next decade? Because you've just sort of celebrated 10 years, and what would success over the next 10 years look like for you? Or yeah, are there any hopes, aspirations, goals?
Well, I think things are moving very quickly already, and I think that's a societal thing rather than my actual impact on the world. But I think that I would like to see a lot more papers from Central and South America. I would like to see an opportunity to have some kind of clothing cultures representation, maybe in terms of workshops or conferences or something of that ilk. But I would like to see those on an international basis. I would like to have some kind of international network which would, you know, address some of those issues, so we could have some proper kind of idea sharing, maybe work together in different kinds of pockets, so we could start to think about similarities and difference. I think there are lots of things that I have heard as somebody who goes to lots of conferences about people doing work on, but they seem to be working a little bit in isolation, and their ideas are perhaps from one area, and they could really tie in together to create something very amazing in terms of change. So I think the opportunity for more networking would be lovely, particularly if the world gets a little bit safer, to do that in person as well as online. I think online is a good starting point, but it doesn't perhaps facilitate the same kind of networking. So I'd like to see more networking. I'd like to see more papers from Central and South America. I'd like to see the development of more new voices. And I would like to see, you know, in 10 years' time, it would be really good if I could retire. To be
No, we're not letting you. You can retire from Southampton, but you're not leaving internet. We got you locked in. You got at least another 10. I joke.
But I think it would be lovely to see a development of new voices and new scholars. And you know what I've seen in the last few months, just in the last few months, but actually throughout my entire career, is I've seen wonderful new ECRs, people who are coming out of their PhDs, out of their MAs, with amazing research, amazing skills, brilliant new ideas, brilliant new attitudes. And I want those people to be doing my job in the future. You know, I want them to be doing this, perhaps not with Clothing Cultures, maybe set up their own journal, obviously with intellect, but I want them to be, I want those voices to that. You know, for me, it's heartening to know that there are all these new people out there who are saving the discipline, you know, and I think that's so important.
I think that's wonderful. I think it's well put, Jo. I would also just say that we also understand, obviously, how difficult it is for people like from the global south to travel north, for example.
Course, yes.
And I think what's great is when conferences that call themselves international are actually truly international, and they do go, you know, to the southern hemisphere. They do go to the global south. They do go to places that maybe are a bit off the beaten track, where there's a big uni, or that maybe it's a conservative area with a university that really warrants international investment and international perspectives. And, you know, and I've just one off the top of my head, like there's the Performance Studies International, where, you know, I'll have Clothing Cultures, as you know, with my list of journals I'll be taking. But that's, you know, that's in Brazil this year, you know, and it's been, you know, other places, you know, in Latin America and South America previous years and things like that. And there's a number of other conferences and things taking place. And then just this summer, you and I were at the FCVC event, and, you know, run by Sarah Gilligan and Petra. And I think that was fantastic as well, because it's that smaller, kind of more workshopy kind of feeling. You can get people together and give them a true opportunity to interact. And again, I know there were some people who came from farther afield there too, but it was in, you know, it was in Croatia, and it wasn't in London at LCF. It wasn't in New York at FIT. It was, you know, in a random part of Croatia where there was great university and great support. But, you know, I ramble on, but I think it's great to support these conferences, and Intellect certainly is going to continue to do that. And I know that you do too, that are in the global south, that are in places like Africa, or that are in smaller communities, because otherwise we're not, you know, it's easy to say, isn't it? But it's difficult for these people to make it to some of these events and conferences, to have network. So I think the more that these organizations can take the events further afield, it's only going to build the membership, and it's only going to create better quality submissions overall, and develop the scholarly research from these regions. So that's just my caveat.
I think that's a great point though, James. I think that also we all learn from traveling too.
Yeah, right.
You know, traveling is a great leveler, and you know, it gives us the opportunity to reach out to people in their own environments, you know, and I think that's really important. In the same way that it's good for people to come here and see me, you know, it's good to see people in real life, you know.
Yeah, no, most definitely. And, you know, I do my fair share of conferences, and I have to admit it is great that, you know, things are truly back to normal, as it were, in terms of post-pandemic anyway. And lots of people are traveling, and it's great to be at these events. And I know we have to be mindful of sustainability and how much we travel, but I do think it's vital at the moment, especially with the arts and humanities being under attack and education being under attack so much as it is, that we do, you know, interact, and I think doing that in person is important. But I have some quick time questions for you, Jo. So I'm going to keep you a little longer. So I'm going to ask you some quick questions. Just give me some quick answers, but feel free to develop them if you want to. But the first one I have for you, now you're someone who's worked a lot with material, and you're obviously famous for the culture of knitting, which explores making as a social practice. So I wanted to ask you, what's your favorite material to work with as a maker or as a practitioner? Someone who actually does stuff. Is there a material you particularly like to use?
Oh, absolutely, wool, of course. Of course. It is the most wonderful, sustainable, brilliant, incredible thing. It's just amazing. It is just great. And also, you know, it's an indigenous fiber to most places. Most places have a sheep. And you know, it is wonderful, and you can do so much with it. You know, there's this wonderful thing that the British Wool Council had, a little poem they had in the 1950s, and it was in summer warm, in winter cool, there isn't in winter warm, in summer cool, there is no substitute for wool. And you think that's absolutely true. We don't have enough wool, and as we start to heat our houses more, and as you know, that costs more and more, much better to wrap up wool than to pay for your radiators to be on. This is a very first world problem here.
No, true. No, but you do have people who with the heating on sitting around in vests and t-shirts, and I think they've forgotten that grandma's memo about, you know, the old keep calm and carry on days. I think that's really cool. And you know what, I lived for a long time in the UK, and I used to wear a lot of wool, especially merino in the damp and out hiking and stuff. Now that I live in the desert in Tucson, Arizona, I wear merino a lot because it keeps you cool. So I always thought, we'll see how effective this is, and it's proven to me. And also the thing which is magic for anyone out there who does, you know, do a lot of exercise or outdoorsy stuff, or working outdoors, for example. You know, the merino or any kind of wool fiber, really, you come home and you're like, oh, that smells a bit, and then you wake up the next day, and if you were so inclined and you smelled the armpits, you'd be like, back to normal. I've got another week out of this, no problem. And I just think it's an amazing fiber from that. It always shocks me if you go on like a couple days out in the wilderness or something where you're limited to the amount of clothing you can take. Merino wool or another wool is definitely the finest garment you can have with you.
Just need to hang it outside, no washing.
Exactly, you know, and we obviously have excellent hygiene otherwise, but you know,
indeed.
Well, thank you for that. That's wonderful. I did have an inkling that you might go.
I might say that. Yeah.
I got another one though for you, and I wanted to ask, who's your greatest influence?
Well, these will be people that maybe people don't necessarily know because they're academics, but they're all academics in the field. So they may know, they may not. These are people that I worked with when I was a PhD student here at Winchester. And one of them is Leslie Ellis Miller, who is a textile historian. The other is Barbara Berman, who is a dress historian. And the other was my PhD supervisor, Judy Atfield, who's no longer with us. And one of the things that they all were wonderful women. They never got very high in their careers here because they were women. And they were absolutely brilliant, brilliant women, top of the field, but just were never really recognised in that way. And I think why they influenced me so much is because they had, you know, a difficult time, but also what they taught me was they taught me about collegiality and how to be part of a team under very difficult circumstances. But what they also taught me was about leadership. And they taught me basically that if you have any kind of privilege, however small that is, you make sure that when you're on the ladder, you've got one hand on the rung and you've got one hand behind you helping someone up. And that is exactly how I live my life. And I think that that is quite rare, to be honest. I think we live in a very cut and thrust world. And I think that if you can be mindful that other people are going to need a hand too, give them one. You know, don't give them prizes. People don't need a pat on the head. They need a hand up, right? You know, and I think that's really important. And I hope that that's what Clothing Cultures does for lots of people too. It gives them a hand up. It gives them the opportunity to take hold of the rung and give somebody else a hand up too.
Oh, I think that's wonderful. Thank you for that answer. I think it's so important. You know, I think that we get, partly through algorithms and social media, we get overwhelmed by individualism. And I think that collectivist action and community, especially within academia around topics like clothing cultures presents, I think is really important and needed, but something that we can just, you know, in our day-to-day lives, just think about as well. So that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that anecdote. And then I would just say to everyone out there, go Google those ladies and see what their research was about, see what they did, what they were able to achieve with those limitations that they were put under. So yeah, thanks, Jo. Appreciate you sharing that. Now, academia, if you weren't in academia per se, what would you be doing?
Do you know what I would be doing, James? I would have my own YouTube channel. In fact, this is absolutely what I'm going to do when I retire. Sorry if this is going to bore everybody listening to this, but I am just
ready for it.
just so for the YouTube. I love YouTube. Honestly, I love it. And I'm going to plug this because I haven't started it yet. So, you know, I'm going to call it Turney's Journeys. And nice. I'm going to just do a travelogues all the time because I travel endlessly. I love travel. But also I feel that there are lots of people who find travel very difficult. And I'm not a luxury traveller at all, but I'm very fortunate to live in Europe. So it means that I can travel lots of places quite easily. And I think that there are lots of opportunities for people who are over 50 or people who travel on their own to perhaps have some help. So I'm very good at traveling on my own and knowing all of the cool places to go for people who perhaps think that they just need to see the main sites. So I think that that is what I would do. And I would, if I had won the lottery, I might just start doing it tomorrow. You know, it's just, I would just love it.
Oh, well, I have, you know, as I follow you on social media, I can attest to your skills, vision, and yeah, you do get off the beaten track. So I definitely follow your updates. So I look forward to the YouTube channel and as it develops in the future. We'll have to have you back on the podcast in a different incarnation of Jo Turney. Oh, that's cool. That's exciting. It's good to have some exciting retirement plans. I think I might have to start thinking about some of those myself.
We have got a long way to go. Just in case people think I'm very elderly, I've got some time.
You just already. Yeah, I think I've got a few years to go still. Luckily, we work in publishing and education, and you know, there's lots of rewards. But talking about travel, I was going to ask, are you a city mouse or a country mouse?
Oh, well, I like both very much, to be honest. I spent the summer in the mountains in Italy. I love mountains and I love lakes. And again, I'm very fortunate to live so close to those things, really. But the city, I love cities too. And my favourite city is Rome. Hands down, Rome. I've been there 100 times maybe, and it's just so vibrant. And it's just so spectacular, but so ordinary. I think that there's something that is quite remarkable about walking in the same footsteps of people who have walked thousands of years before you, essentially, well, not thousands, but, you know, a fair old few years before you. And it's very ordinary, and everybody's just ignoring it, and it's just wonderful. And you can just be sitting down eating dinner, and then somebody brings out a violin and they're playing, and then somebody's dancing. And, you know, it's just magical. And then if there's a traffic jam, people physically pick up a car and move it. You know, what a place. You get the best food, you get the best art, you get just this vibrancy and beauty all in one place. It's magic.
I got to say, I love Rome. It has a very special place in my heart too, and I do get the opportunity to go there kind of infrequently, but every few years for work-related business and stuff. But I agree with you for all the things you've said. But for me, the other thing is, it's not just that vibrancy, but it's the city at night, which is obviously a bit of a cliche. But my gosh, it has this energy, and yeah, like it's even the tourists kind of get the vibe, in the sense, not that I'm not a tourist, but you know what I'm saying? It's like people kind of like in Paris and some of these other great cities, I feel that maybe, you know, people don't necessarily adjust their behavior that much. Whereas in Rome, I always feel like people are Romans for the day, and you can see that people kind of, oh yeah, want to live that sort of lifestyle. And walking around with the monuments, and as you say, within the steps of those who came before you, but there's so much public art and so much, you know, the palazios and everything as well. And then of course modern stuff with graffiti and other things like that too. So for me, it has such a vibrancy. I think it's a great city. But yeah, like you too, mountains are very special, but you can be in the mountains and then you can be in Rome fairly quickly.
Exactly. I mean, it's got it all, hasn't it? I mean, that is the beauty of travel, though, isn't it? The fact that you kind of happen upon things as you travel. You know, it's all very well going to see the big things where everybody else is, but the everyday life is the thing that makes it, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. And you have to kind of go to these cities and almost don't go and do all the big hits, all the touristy stuff, or pick a couple of things, and then rather than like jumping in an Uber and rushing to get there, or hitting public transport necessarily, maybe just, you know, walk and promenade and go between a couple of them, and have that passeggiaro type situation. Again, a privilege, but wonderful city if you do get the opportunity to get there. So I'm keeping on with a kind of the travel theme here, though, because you and I have been to so many conferences together over the years, and you know, we've seen some funny things at these events. I was wondering whether you maybe had a fun or funny story from a scholarly conference you might share. Please don't be one about me embarrassing myself.
I remember, well, I don't know if you will remember this, but it was at a conference in the States, and I'd rushed out one morning, and I'd just to see everything. You know how exciting it is when you're in a new place, you want to see everything. And I'd rushed out and I'd fallen over. And do you remember this? I don't know if you remember this. But anyway, it was just awful. And it was on the first day, and I'd been wearing stupid shoes, so it was my own fault. And I fell over. And of course, in America, you get the fire brigade to pick you up off the floor, don't you?
Yeah. You don't get sort of like the
no ambulance man. So anyway, the fire brigade came and picked me up because I, at that stage, sprained both of my ankles, and they were just like sausages, and it was awful. And they kept shouting at me, "Have you had some breakfast?" And I was saying, "Yes, I've had breakfast. What have you had to eat?" And I said, "Well, I've had some yogurt and I've had some coffee." Oh. And I said, "Why are you asking?" I said, "Are you diabetic?" And I said, "No." And they said, "Oh, okay." And I said, "Do I look diabetic?" I said, "No." I said, "Okay." Anyway, they said, we're asking because this is the diabetic capital of America. Okay, the diabetes capital of America. And I said, "Oh, okay, that's very interesting." Anyway, they picked me up, and it's so embarrassing because my dad was a fireman. So being hoiked up the stairs by about 20 firemen was not good for me. Anyway, I was feeling very sorry for myself in the back of the ambulance. And I said, and they said, "Oh, how long have you been here?" And I said, "Oh, it's my first day." And they said, "Oh, don't worry." And they opened the curtains in the ambulance so I could see the sights as I went to A&E. It was just lovely. It was just lovely. I mean, it was a horrible situation, obviously, but
silver linings.
No, but it just shows that anything can happen. But you know, things do happen, and
I don't know. As we've both got a bit older, we're probably both more inclined to wear sensible shoes at these conferences. My feet can't take the punishment anymore, anyway. So I've got to have all my cushions and everything in place if I'm going to survive a week at a conference.
They are heavy on the feet, and particularly if you're in a conference venue. You don't get any air or any light.
True. That's one of the things, again, no disrespect to our US conference hosts, but they're often held in these large, conference hotels, the likes of a Marriott or whatever. Whereas in Europe, you often have them on universities, which is a real distinction. And of course, you then get to walk about the campus and get the vibe. And often, you might then have to walk back into town or something to get to your hotel or your accommodations. So yeah, sometimes if you haven't been to an academic conference, if you go to one of these big American ones, you often, you could go a few days without leaving the venue. And I remember once I went to Atlantic City, which is a place in New Jersey, and it's basically the Northeast's equivalent of Las Vegas, but it was very popular before they legalized or decriminalized gambling in various different states in that part of the US, but it's on harder times now as a result of a lot of the small casinos and things opening up. But anyway, I went to this conference and it was pretty good, but I realized after 4 days that I hadn't left the casino that was hosting the conference, because I was starting work at sort of 7 a.m. and then going to the conference sessions and then finishing quite late. And then there's no windows, there's no places to escape. So next thing you know, you're just having a meal in the conference venue, i.e. the casino. And then I don't gamble, but I'm like, oh, may I pull a couple of these slot machines? And the next thing you know, it's 2 a.m, you've got to be back up at 6. And you're like, what the hell happened here? And I do remember that I walked outside for the first time in 3 days, and the first thing I was confronted by was a load of blood on the pavement. And I thought, you know what? I think I'm going to get myself back inside here and sit in the session. I can join. But yeah, so I don't know. I've had a few incidents at conferences over the years, but that's the only one I'm going to share for today. Now, talking about travel, I have one final question for you today, and it actually comes from a conference. Anyone who's listening to the show regularly will know that I've added this question to our quick time round, because I was just at a conference and this woman came up to me. I'm at the desk, and she goes, "Time travel," and I said, "Yeah." And she goes, "Would you travel backwards or forwards, and why?" And I thought, it's a bloody good question. So, Jo Turney, time travel. If you could travel through time, would you go backwards or forwards, and what would you hope to experience?
I would go backwards.
Okay.
And this is probably a research thing, really, but I would go backwards, and I'd go back to the 70s, which is pretty much where all of my research starts. And I'd go and buy all of the magazines that I can't get in the library.
Amazing.
And probably I'd buy somewhere in Mayfair, so I could get a bit of a foothold onto the housing market, maybe. But I think it's about the fact that there are lots of things from particular periods in time where people don't collect them or haven't collected things, and I think it would be about collecting those kinds of things, collecting things that we haven't got now, save people time.
Well, that's a very practical, solutions-based answer, but I get it. And I think for me, it would definitely be, I think I'd go backwards too, but I'm hearing different perspectives from people. So I'm kind of going back and forth on where and what I would do. But on that bombshell, I want to say thank you so much for all of your time and all of your fun answers today. And also for really kind of getting to the nitty-gritty about what clothing cultures really is, what the journal's about, and like who should be checking it out, which is loads of people. And then, of course, just to highlight again, open call for papers. Really want that diverse range of scholarship from different parts of the world, different groups submitting their work. So I just urge everyone out there to take a look at Jo, take a look at Jo's other projects like The Culture of Knitting, which is, magnum opus, one of those important books out there, really well worth the read. And of course, all the fine work that Jo's done with us, especially through Clothing Cultures. So go to intellectbooks.com, start your journey there, take a look at Clothing Cultures, and then maybe do a deep dive on Jo, or if not, jump in the time machine, maybe go back to when she was doing her research on knitting and see what was going on. But just wanted to say a big thank you to you today, Jo, and any final thoughts from you?
No, thank you. Everybody, if you're listening, if you want to work with us, if you want to do anything with us, if you want to be part of the team, if you want to, set up a special issue, if you want to just publish with us in any way, if you want to do a conference, if you want to be part of any of these things, if you just want some careers advice, anything, just get in touch. That's what we're here for.
No. Well, look, Joe, I don't think everyone who works on journals would say that. So big up you. Thank you for being so collegial and for being so open for that kind of communication. Yeah, well, okay. Thank you very much for your time. And thanks to all our listeners. It's, of course, wonderful to have you all tuning in. And we'll see you here next time on In Conversation. Thanks and goodbye.